and thank you for joining us. I'm Wilson Stribling. Welcome to another edition of At Issue, where we discuss and debate the issues facing the state of Mississippi and how these issues impact you. It is the fifth week of the 2019 legislative session, and a key deadline has come and gone. Tuesday was the final day for committees to act on general bills originating in their own chamber. Bills that survive move to the full House or Senate for debate. Tax and spending bills face a later deadline to pass committees. Here's a brief look at a few popular bills, dead or alive. More than a dozen bills would have removed the Confederate battle emblem that has been on the Mississippi flag since 1894. A Senate bill would have set a 3-day deadline for voters to go to a courthouse to show photo identification if they forget ID at the polls. Current law allows 5 days. A bill in the House and the Senate would have legalized marijuana for medical purposes. Senate bills would have allowed a philosophical or religious exemption for vaccinations that are required for children to attend school. Several bills proposed setting a state minimum wage higher than the federal minimum of $7.25 an hour. And several bills would have required equal pay for equal work done by women and men. A Senate bill that would reduce the liability of Mississippi businesses when someone is the victim of a crime on their property led to a morning-long debate. The Landowners Protection Act says businesses that take steps to make their properties safe would not be 100% liable if a serious criminal act is committed on their property. Republican Senator Josh Harkins of Flowood says right now, when a criminal commits a serious crime, the victim can hold the owner completely liable for the offense.
What I'm trying to do is provide some protection for property owners when they should not be held accountable for the acts of another individual that they didn't know, they didn't invite on their property, and they had no idea they were going to commit whatever crime they committed. So this is about, making sure that property owners maintain their property like they're supposed to, like it's already in current law, but this is providing them protection where they are not civilly liable for the acts of a third party, some stranger they don't even know.
Harkins says even if a property owner doesn't take steps to keep his property safe, his liability would not be 100%. The criminal would face the bulk of the liability. Democratic Senator Derek Simmons of Greenville says right now businesses that make every effort to keep their property safe are seldom held liable. He wants language removed that would make businesses liable only if they're somehow involved in the crime. The bill would also require that the criminal be convicted of a felony within 3 years before an owner could be sued.
What this does is it basically raises the bar. It shifts the burden from the plaintiff over to a requirement where it grants immunity to the business owner. There's no way you can recover based upon the language in this bill because it requires, again, that the landowner to actively, affirmatively, with conscious decision-making to participate with what the third party has done on those premises.
Simmons contends there would be no incentive for businesses, especially those in higher crime areas, to keep their businesses safe. Harkins says the bill is supported by some 32 business organizations. Also, Mississippi this year will not expand its hate crimes law to allow stronger criminal penalties for crimes targeting people because of sexual orientation, gender identity, or disability. Current law allows for enhanced penalties for crimes that target people because of their race, color, ancestry, ethnicity, religion, national origin, or gender. Rob Hill is the state director of the Human Rights Alliance of Mississippi. He says they will continue to lobby lawmakers on this issue.
Well, one thing we know is from polling data that we're releasing today is that almost 60% of Mississippians care about this. We may disagree on some things as it relates to, issues of our identity or sexual orientation and things like that. But what we find is the majority of Mississippians overwhelmingly agree that nobody should be targeted or nobody should be hurt or harmed simply because of who they are and who they love.
Here's a look at a few bills that had passed through committee by the Tuesday deadline. A House bill that would prevent charges from being filed against trafficking victims who are younger than 18. The minor would be taken into protective custody and counseling would be provided. Foster parents would be trained to help trafficking victims. A House and a Senate teacher pay bill for a $500 increase in teacher salaries for each of the next 2 years passed committee for a total raise of $1,000. Some Mississippians accused or convicted of crimes would face less harsh penalties. A bill in the House would expand drug courts to handle people with mental illnesses and military veterans. It would also stop automatic suspension of driver's licenses for non-payment of fines or for simple drug possession. And a property owner liability bill in the House and Senate would limit reasons that property owners could be sued for something that happens on their property. Mississippi lawmakers are considering what could become one of the strictest abortion laws in the country. Bills that passed legislative committees Tuesday would ban abortion once a fetal heartbeat is detected, and that could be as early as 6 weeks into pregnancy. Republican Senator Angela Hill of Picayune is sponsoring Senate Bill 2116.
As we learn with technology, our later and later abortions really should not be taking place, because truly women have options early in the pregnancy, and they have technology to detect that that was not there many years ago. So I think the fact that when you know that there's a heart beating, we know that there is a live person when a heart's beating, and the fact that when a coroner pronounces death and puts a death certificate out there, it's based on a heart not beating. So I think that technology, our practices are just so far behind technology with later abortions that this would be safer for women, and it also would be better emotionally also, because I think I've had women write me letters who have had abortions after that they've seen a heartbeat and they think it's the right thing to do at that time, and then later on they feel the emotional scars from it. And I think the fact that we already have to provide an ultrasound, that's already in law. They already have to look for a heartbeat, so that's nothing new. It just basically says that if you want to terminate a pregnancy, that you can't do it unless it's a medical emergency after detectable heartbeat. Now we have pregnancy tests that'll detect a pregnancy 9 days after fertilization. We have Plan B. Technology has come so far with available options for women early that our laws and courts just haven't kept up with the advancements in technology to stop those later and later term abortions.
Mississippi enacted a law last year that prohibits abortion after 15 weeks. A federal judge declared it unconstitutional, and the state is currently asking an appeals court to overturn that ruling. But Republican Governor Phil Bryant has already said he will sign what is commonly known as a heartbeat bill into law if it passes this session. Youth Testify is a program that mobilizes young women ages 17 to 24 across America who have had abortions and want to share their stories and fight for abortion access. At Issue producer Ashley Norwood sat down with a young woman in Jackson. She chooses to go by the name Marie.
I personally been there. I found out I was pregnant at 7 weeks when I was 15. And let's say they did go along with the law. And it was a 6 week back, and I was just 7 weeks. And I was forced to, basically they tell you were forced to have a child. And I was not financially, I didn't even have a job. And being in that shoes and being in that predicament, it's really hard, because I could tell a lot I talked to a lot of people that been through rape trauma. I talked to a lot of people that's been through abuse relationship, and if it's going through that, you making it seem like women that can't think for themselves. That's what I feel like on that situation.
So with that, just looking back at that time, you were 15. You got some people that say, well, she should have wore a condom. How do you respond to that?
I want to say, honestly, people make mistakes. Now, I'm not saying children are mistakes. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying people make mistakes. People make bad choices, just like I did. But honestly, if you I'm not well enough. If you're not well enough, and if you don't plain out want to, and it's your choice, I think just leave it alone. It's not your pot. It's not your area. And honestly, I just need people to mind their business.
While advocates for school choice and supporters of traditional public schools are still at odds over expanding the state's educational scholarship accounts program, an amended version of Senate Bill 2675 passed the Senate Education Committee and will go to the floor for a vote. For approved students with special needs, the accounts take thousands of dollars out of the student's existing school system and give it to parents to use for additional instruction or private school. Advocates like Grant Callen of Empower Mississippi like the program and say it should be expanded. Callen talks with MPB's Desiree Frazier.
The goal of this program was to help students. Let's make sure they get the money they need so that parents have the freedom to find the right setting for their child. Because, you know, students with special needs sometimes need a little something different, whether it's dyslexia therapy or extra services or tutoring after class. Sometimes public schools do a great job with students with special needs, and sometimes they don't. And we just want parents to be able to have that option if they feel like their child is falling behind in a traditional public school.
There was also the issue of accountability and tracking those funds.
So this is the lack of bureaucratic handcuffs on this program really is not a bug. That's kind of a feature of the program. There is no more, I mean, let me say it this way. There's a lot of bureaucracy and a lot of oversight and a lot of protections in the law for special education within traditional public schools. And that a lot of kids are still falling through the cracks, and a lot of kids are not being served. So this doesn't change any of that. If parents want to work with the traditional public school system, which has all that oversight and accountability and bureaucracy, they still have that option. This simply says if parents are pulling their hair out because they know their child is not being served and the promises that have been made to their child are not being delivered on, they have another option. And this option is intentionally light on the accountability and the oversight because we want parents to have the freedom to shop around to find the best setting. Sometimes that's traditional public school, sometimes that's something else. So we want to make sure parents have the freedom to do that.
Nancy Loome is with the pro-public schools organization, the Parents Campaign. She says the accounts are the same as vouchers. Loome says the program does not work, that money is left on the table, and that public schools are being hurt.
They say that the public schools are not doing a good job of providing these services, and class sizes are too big, and there aren't enough dyslexia therapists, and so parents should be able to choose their schools and take these funds to private schools. But let's look at what the law actually says. What the law says, it does not say that parents get to choose. It says that the private schools get to choose the students that they want with our tax dollars. It also says that they do not have to provide any special education services at all. The law also says that the private schools don't have to tell us how they spend our tax dollars. Again, they don't have to admit any children that they don't want. They pick and choose the ones that they want. As a result, less than half of the children who have been given these vouchers have actually used them. And parents say that that is because their children are denied admission to the private schools, or that they cannot find a private school that provides the special education services that the child needs, or that they cannot afford the balance of the tuition and fees that the private schools charge beyond what the voucher will pay for. So you see that the law is not written to help children. The law is written to benefit private schools.
The House passed a bill supporting a plan to ease penalties on people accused or convicted of crimes. By a vote of 109-4, House Bill 1352, also known as the Criminal Justice Reform Act, passed the House and is headed to the Senate for more work. At Issue producer Ashley Norwood has more on that.
Lawmakers say House Bill 1352, better known as the Criminal Justice Reform Act, is a step in the right direction for Mississippi. Republican Representative Bill Kincaid of Byhalia explains some of its highlights.
It outlines, occupational licensure, opportunities for expungement, and what is and what is not allowable. It does cover, it does provide for mental health courts, veterans courts, modeled like the drug court. We'd call them intervention courts. So it's got some exciting components that I think will help the state of Mississippi.
The measure has bipartisan support, but many Democrats believe it should include language that will eliminate the state's lifetime voting ban against some convicted felons. Tuesday, the Southern Poverty Law Center, Democratic lawmakers, and former felons rallied at the Capitol, asking lawmakers to consider lifting the ban and giving individuals a second chance.
In 2017, Mississippi's legislature restored voting rights to just 14 individuals.
And I have to teach my children to be an outstanding citizen, be a good person, teach my children to vote and stand up and make your voice heard. But at the same time, I have to tell my children, because your daddy messed up when he was so long ago, I don't have that right and I'm not going to do that. So I want you not to follow my footsteps.
I lost my right to vote over 30 years ago. I'm a father of 9 children, and I'm not that same little boy anymore that when I committed that crime. I've never voted in my life, and I would love the chance for me, my children, to teach them the democracy way. And I hear of all these states getting rights back to vote to people that's made mistakes, and I ask myself, should I even live here in Mississippi anymore?
Voting is a fundamental right in this country, and Mississippi is one of only 3 states to permanently disenfranchise someone. Most of America recognizes that individuals deserve the right to vote, and in fact, they get their right to vote back after completing their sentence. In Mississippi, once again, we're behind the times.
More than 20 bills to restore voting rights died in committee on both sides of the Capitol under Tuesday's deadline. Democratic caucus leader Derek Simmons of Greenville says the battle is not over.
The strategy is always to take the language and all of our legislation that was not successful and try to get that language incorporated or included in some vehicle that's moving through the legislative process.
So like making amendments on the floor?
Making amendments on the floor, making amendments in House bills that come over and that will go to Senate committees. And of course the bills that pass the Senate will go to House committees. And we can work with our colleagues on the House side to add House language to those bills, that Senate bills that go over to the House.
Let's get straight to the point now with views from both sides of the aisle. Brandon Jones is a Democrat. He is an attorney with the Beria Jones law firm and is a former member of the House. And filling in for Austin Barber this week is Mississippi Republican Party Chairman Lucian Smith. Lucian, thanks for being back with us on that issue. And Brandon, welcome back as always. Yeah. Good to have you both here. Let's start with criminal justice reform. Brandon, you say this is something the Democrats have been working on and pushing for a long time.
It truly is. For years and years, we've been trying to change Mississippi expungement rules. We've been serious about trying to increase the amount of mental health courts in the state. And this bill has a little bit of both of those in it. And very happy to have Republicans join in this effort and to help get this thing across the finish line. I think it's a really strong step in the right direction. Probably, you know, Lucian, we got some more steps to take. We're incarcerating too many of our young people. Too many folks in Mississippi are living their lives out in jail and then not having a really clear path for how to get back into the workforce, become productive members of society. But this is a very positive step for us.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, the criminal justice reform was a hallmark of Governor Bryant's agenda in 2014. It's a hallmark of the president's agenda right now. And this is really a continuation of it. I mean, there's nobody in our prisons who doesn't deserve to be there, but there's certainly some who don't need to be there. And I think it's smart that the governor and the legislative leadership is working to help people reintegrate into society and make sure we're spending money sending the right people to jail and looking at diversion programs when we can get people treatment when that's what they need instead of incarceration. I think that's a major part of this bill, and it's a real achievement.
You heard some pretty emotional testimony there from a couple of gentlemen who haven't been able to vote for years because of their records. That part did not make it past a committee. Are you hopeful that will change in the future?
Very hopeful. We had maybe 25 bills between the House and the Senate that address that issue. Too many people are not being given back that right after they've paid their debt, after they've served their time. And so I think that's another area. You heard that we're one of only 3 that still do it that way. And so, frankly, I think we've got to get better in that regard. And I think things are moving. I think you're seeing more bipartisan interest in trying to figure that out, too. It's sad that those bills didn't pass this year, but I think we'll continue to see those.
Yeah, I'm certainly open to having a thoughtful, long-term discussion about what should and shouldn't prevent you from voting. I don't think it's inherently offensive to say that there's certain conduct that you can undertake that's so bad, that so fundamentally breaks your covenant with the rest of society that we're going to no longer let you choose its leaders. But I think it's certainly a good idea to say, are we picking the right things? Are we over-inclusive? Are there crimes that should be included that aren't being included? And have a real dialogue on what should and shouldn't prevent you from getting to select our leaders.
Well, and notably on that point, I think of all the bills that were filed, the carve-outs included violent crimes and crimes of sexual assault, sexual in nature, those types of things. And so I think what you just described is in keeping with sort of where the thought process is right now.
I think that's right.
Let's talk now about this premises liability concept. Where did this come from? Where did this idea originate?
You know, it's one of the last things that wasn't handled in tort reform back in 2004. For any other area of tort law, if multiple people are responsible for the damages, the jury is able to say, you know, Wilson, you're 20% responsible, Brandon's 80% responsible, and each of you have to pay your fair share. In premises liability, a jury could think, well, gosh, the owner of that grocery store or that housing unit or whatever it happened to be, they were really only 2% liable. The criminal was 98% liable, but we're going to make them pay 100% of the damages that occurred. And that's the only area of the tort law, and the statute prohibits juries from actually apportioning fault. And that's the focus of this bill, is just letting juries look at the complete circumstances and say, this is how much the different parties who are involved ought to be liable for this.
Brandon, you're an attorney. Does that make sense to you?
No, it really doesn't. You know, in a year when we're passing human trafficking bills to try to make that harder, and we're trying to really crack down on certain types of assault and domestic violence, things of that nature, what this does is make public places less safe. Whenever a business owner does an analysis as to whether or not to buy a security camera or to invest in a security guard or to have security lighting out in their parking lot, it's a cost-benefit analysis. You know, if I'm going to put this money up, what's the benefit to me? With a law like this, which essentially comes from insurance companies who don't want to pay claims for premises liability, then that business owner is going to be less inclined to buy a security camera. He's going to be less inclined to keep his fencing straight. He's going to be less inclined to have adequate lighting. Under this bill, that business owner is not going to be liable for any of those decisions. And so no matter how many thousands of people he may be inviting into his shop or into his store, or into whatever the case may be, then that's no longer going to be held to that standard. And I can tell you, I've had several of these cases, and they've gone a lot of different ways. These are not simple cases. I would argue with Senator Harkins, who made it sound as if they're just throwing around money in these instances. That's just simply not true. And you can look at the public record of these cases to see that it's not true. The truth is, these are hard cases. You have to show that there was some almost just willful disregard of safety by the landowner. That's the current law, really. And so the notion that we would just make this an immunity issue, I think, is problematic, and I think it makes us less safe. So I hate to see it moving like it is.
And I don't think the purpose of the legislation is to provide any sort of immunity. I think it's just to allow fault to be apportioned between the landowner and the criminal who's engaged in whatever sort of conduct caused the damages. I mean, I think that's, to me, that's the real focus. I don't think you're going to get one fewer security camera because of this, but what you might get is more stores opening up. I mean, I think you've got business owners who are afraid to be in business in some places because of this risk of liability, and I think if you are able to apportion fault, I don't think there'll be any security risk. I mean, I think the criminal law and the market will take care of that piece of it. I do think you will see more investment, and it'll help the economy generally if we have this.
I wish that was it, Lucian. I think the problem is Josh has inserted this word impel, which, by the way, does not occur in any Supreme Court case in the history of Mississippi, and you only can find it in the dictionary. And because of that word impel, which Josh seems to be really, it's important to him that it stays in there, it really is an immunity bill. So you're not going to see apportionment either. So you could take Josh's argument that we just heard and say, well, now the reverse is true. So because now if the property owner is totally derelict and does not do anything to help provide security measures in a place where there is known security hazards, then that person can have various crimes occur and not pay a dime or not fix anything.
Let's move on to abortion legislation now. If Mississippi is already facing a legal challenge to a 15-week abortion law, does it make legal sense to try to make it illegal even sooner?
Look, there's one party in Mississippi that supports the rights of children to be born without being terminated. It's the Republican Party. I'm glad to see that under Republican leadership we're passing more good legislation to protect the unborn, especially as the Democratic Party keeps lurching further and further to the left. I mean, you saw the governor of Virginia, before he got into his current issues, could barely articulate that he wasn't talking about infanticide as he pushed some of the abortion legislation up there. So I'm glad to see that the Mississippi Republicans are continuing to do what Mississippi Republicans do, which is protect the unborn.
You know, Wilson, we've got a party that has a lot of folks with pro-life sensibilities, and we have folks who are pro-choice. There were folks who voted in committee that are members of the Democratic Party who voted in favor of this bill. Stepping back and looking at this from a big picture perspective, which we do often on this program, we just had the 15-week ban struck down by the federal court. Now we are putting, and then last night, the United States Supreme Court, with 2 Donald Trump appointees, said that Louisiana had gone too far. Every time that those cases move through the system, tax dollars are spent fighting that issue, battling it out. That's money that can't be used in schools. It's money that can't be used to build roads. Mississippi each year does this. Frankly, I don't think it's a sincere matter of political belief. I think it's an election year type of deal that you get to talk about abortion once again. Mississippi already has the most restrictive laws in the country, and now we will spend more money, waste more money fighting this battle, and we know what the ultimate outcome will be.
I like to think it's because we're the safest place in the country to be an unborn child, and that's a good thing that's a result of Republican leadership.
We've got to leave it right there, gentlemen.
Put it on a commercial.
We're out of time. Thank you again, Lucian, for being with us. We invite you to join us again next week for another edition of At Issue here on MPB.